In May 1808, Napoleon forced the Spanish king to abdicate and put his own brother on the throne in Madrid. Within 2 years, colonial cities from Caracas to Buenos Aires had formed their own governing councils, and the question of who actually ruled the Spanish Americas was suddenly wide open. At its peak, this was one of the largest political entities in human history. Nearly all of Latin America, the key islands of the Caribbean, and a foothold clear across the Pacific in the Philippines. So here's the question worth actually chasing. If none of that had broken away, if Spain had somehow held its American empire together into the 21st century, what would it be today? A fading colonial afterthought, or one of the great powers on Earth? Instead, over less than 2 decades, the whole thing came apart. But it wasn't Napoleon that really did this. The cracks were already there. Spain's own Bourbon reforms had spent decades raising taxes and squeezing colonial elites out of local power in favor of officials shipped in from Madrid, and by 1808, that resentment just needed a spark. The men who led the break weren't opportunists riding a power vacuum. They were fighting a settled grievance, one region at a time. To understand the scale of what Spain was actually trying to hold onto, look at the population gap. By 1800, the mother country was already outnumbered by her own colonies. Now stretch that same math forward 2 centuries. Add those together, and a unified Spanish state would be home to something close to 500 million people. That would make it the 3rd most populous country on the planet, behind only China and India, and comfortably ahead of the United States. Population is one thing, economic weight is another. Add up the GDP of Spain and every Spanish-speaking republic in the Americas, and the number gets genuinely staggering. That's not a rounding error. That figure would slot in just behind the United States and China, ahead of Germany, Japan, and India as the world's 3rd largest economy. And the land underneath all that GDP is enormous. Combine every former Spanish-American territory with Spain itself, and you get a landmass bigger than the entire continental United States. For 3 centuries, the thing that actually held the real empire together was silver. The mines at Potosi in modern Bolivia poured out so much of it that it reshaped global trade and financed Spain's wars in Europe. That resource logic never went away, it just changed metals. Today, the resource that would matter is oil, and this hypothetical empire would control an almost absurd share of it. So the numbers make a compelling case for a superpower, but here's the complication nobody likes to sit with. Could Madrid have actually governed all of this? In 1800, a letter from Buenos Aires to Madrid took months to arrive. Distance like that doesn't just strain an empire, it breaks it. Compare it to Portugal and Brazil. Portugal's king literally moved his entire court to Rio de Janeiro in 1808 to keep the empire unified. It didn't matter. Brazil declared independence anyway in 1822, just under its own monarchy instead of a republic. And it's not like unity held up even among the liberators themselves. Bolivar's own dream, Gran Colombia, a single state covering Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador, lasted barely a decade before it split into 3 separate countries by 1830. That's the uncomfortable answer buried in the premise. Even in a timeline where Spain never lost its grip, geography, distance, and regional identity were always working against a single unified state. It probably fractures eventually anyway, just decades or a century later than it actually did. What Spain did leave behind, whether it kept the territory or not, is language. Spanish is the official language of 20 countries today, and it's the native tongue of roughly 500 million people worldwide, more than English natively spoken. It's worth remembering the empire technically lost more than just the Americas. In that same 1898 war, Spain handed the United States the Philippines too, a colony larger in population than Spain itself is today. The closest real analogy for what a unified Spanish-speaking bloc might resemble isn't an empire at all. It's something more like the European Union, a shared language and history binding independent nations without one capital calling every shot. And that, arguably, is a better outcome than what the math promises. 18 independent Latin American countries mean 18 seats at the United Nations, 18 Olympic teams, 18 distinct national identities built out of a shared colonial past instead of one empire's leftover provinces. So would a Spain that never let go be a superpower today? On paper, almost certainly, a top 3 economy, a top 3 population, an empire of oil fields and coastlines spanning 2 oceans. But paper isn't history. The same forces that broke Gran Colombia apart in a decade would have kept working on any version of this empire, war after war, generation after generation, until it looked a lot less like a superpower and a lot more like the fractured, restless map we actually got. Maybe the real legacy of the Spanish Empire was never the land it lost. It's the 18 nations, 500 million voices, and one language that outlived the throne that once tried to hold them all together.